Eleanor crouched low, her gnarled fingers sifting through the refuse in the trash can nestled between two benches in Central Park. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows and the air was thick with the scent of hot dogs from a nearby vendor. She grimaced, recalling a time when she would have found beauty in such a scene, the vibrant colors and the laughter of children playing in the park. Now the laughter felt like a cruel reminder of what she had lost. With each crumpled wrapper she pulled out, memories flooded back, exhibitions filled with art enthusiasts, the clinking of glasses, and the warm embrace of friends celebrating her success. Once upon a time, Eleanor had been a celebrated artist, her canvases splattered with the colors of her soul, each piece a testament to her passion. But those days felt like a distant dream now, a life erased by time and circumstance. "Look at this one," she muttered to herself, holding up a broken frame, its glass shattered and its face long gone. Once a masterpiece, now a mere shadow. She tossed it back into the bin, the sound echoing her frustration. The city bustled around her, a cacophony of voices, laughter, and the relentless honking of taxis. Yet Eleanor felt like a ghost, invisible to the world that once adored her. As she stood up, brushing off the remnants of her scavenging, her eyes were drawn to a group of well-dressed patrons seated at a nearby cafe. They were animatedly discussing the latest art exhibit at a prestigious gallery, their laughter ringing like bells. She caught snippets of their conversation, phrases like "incredible talent," and the new rising star sending pangs of longing through her heart. "Can you believe the prices of those pieces?" one of the women exclaimed, her designer handbag resting on the table. "It's outrageous, but they're worth every penny." Eleanor's heart ached at the mention of prices, the way art had been commodified. To her, it was never about the money, it was about the expression, the connection forged between the artist and the observer. "Eleanor, you could still create," she whispered to herself, feeling the familiar stirrings of inspiration deep within her. "You still have it in you." But the reality of her situation weighed heavily on her shoulders. She had nowhere to paint, no canvas to speak her truth, and no audience to appreciate it. She shifted her gaze back to the patrons, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the city. A part of her yearned to approach them, to share her story, to tell them about the vibrant colors that once filled her life. But fear gripped her heart. What would they see? A frail old woman with torn clothes and a face weathered by hardship? Would they care about the artist she used to be? A sudden gust of wind swept through the park, rustling the leaves and sending a shiver down Eleanor's spine. She pulled her tattered coat tighter around herself, feeling the chill seep into her bones. The thought of venturing into a luxury restaurant for a meal nagged at her. It was a risk, one that could end in humiliation, but the idea of warmth and food was tantalizing. "What if they laugh at me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the din of the city. "What if they see me as nothing more than a beggar?" Yet another part of her whispered back, "What if they see the artist in you? What if they recognize your talent?" The internal battle raged on as she weighed her options. Finally, with a deep breath, Eleanor gathered her courage. She stood tall, or at least as tall as her frail frame would allow, and made her way toward the restaurant across the street. The establishment loomed ahead, its polished glass doors reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. Her heart raced as she approached, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she reached the entrance, she paused, glancing at her reflection in the glass. The woman staring back at her looked foreign. Hollow cheeks, gray hair pulled back in a messy bun, and clothes that hung loosely on her fragile frame. "You can do this," she murmured, her voice a shaky whisper of encouragement. Pushing the door open, she stepped inside, the warmth enveloping her like a comforting embrace. The restaurant was bustling, filled with the clinking of silverware and the soft murmur of conversation. She felt the eyes of the patrons upon her, a mix of curiosity and disdain, their laughter muffled but still piercing. "Excuse me," she ventured, her voice trembling slightly as she approached the host stand. The young hostess looked up, her expression shifting from professional to one of surprise and then disgust. Eleanor could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, but she pressed on. "I was hoping to get a warm meal." The hostess blinked, glancing over Eleanor's shoulder, as if searching for someone more deserving of attention. "We don't serve people like you here," she replied coldly, a hint of mockery in her tone. Eleanor's heart sank. "I just need something to eat," she pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. She could feel the weight of judgment hanging in the air, and for a moment, she wished she could disappear. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" A man dressed sharply in a tailored suit approached, his demeanor authoritative. Tom, she later learned, was one of the wealthy patrons who frequented the place. "This woman is asking for a meal," the hostess replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "She doesn't belong here." Tom smirked, crossing his arms as he surveyed Eleanor. "Look at her," he scoffed, loud enough for others to hear. "Does she really think she can just waltz in here? What a joke!" Eleanor's heart raced as she felt the heat of embarrassment wash over her. But even in that moment of humiliation, a flicker of defiance ignited within her. She straightened her back, refusing to be broken by his words. "I may not belong here," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I am still a human being, deserving of kindness." The laughter around her was like shards of glass, each sound a reminder of her past and present, colliding in a painful juxtaposition. She had come seeking warmth and sustenance, but found herself standing on a precipice of judgment and ridicule. In that moment, Eleanor knew she had entered a battleground, but she also knew that she carried within her the remnants of the artist she once was, and perhaps, just perhaps, she could spark a flicker of understanding in this cold, unyielding world. Inside the luxurious restaurant, the air was thick with the scent of gourmet dishes and the hum of polite conversation. Eleanor stood at the entrance, her heart pounding against her ribcage, the sound almost drowning out the laughter and clinking of glasses around her. With trembling hands, she adjusted the frayed edges of her coat, a relic of a time when it had been much more than just a layer to protect her from the cold. The patrons, dressed in their tailored suits and elegant dresses, turned to her, their expressions a mix of shock and disdain. "Look at that," whispered a woman at a nearby table, her voice dripping with condescension. "What a sight! Who does she think she is?" Eleanor felt their eyes on her, cutting through her like shards of glass. She cleared her throat, summoning every ounce of courage she had left. "Excuse me," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I was wondering if I could have a meal, just something warm to eat." A ripple of laughter cascaded through the dining room, echoing in her ears. "Did you hear that?" A man in a crisp white shirt chuckled, leaning back in his chair with a smirk plastered across his face. "She wants a meal, as if she belongs here." Eleanor's heart sank. The humiliation washed over her in waves, but she forced herself to stand tall. She knew her worth, even if they didn't see it. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she added, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just need—" "Ma'am, you need to leave," interrupted Jake, the restaurant owner, a tall man with slicked back hair and a permanent scowl. He emerged from the back, his arms crossed tightly against his chest. "This is a fine establishment, not a soup kitchen. We don't serve your kind here." "Please, I'm just asking for a little kindness," Eleanor replied, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of years filled with struggles and loss. Jake's expression didn't soften. "Kindness? This is a restaurant, not a charity. You can't just walk in here looking like that and expect a meal. It's not how it works." As the laughter continued to rise, Clara, a waitress who had been clearing plates nearby, felt a pang of sympathy. She knew that Eleanor's appearance didn't define her worth. Clara had seen people from all walks of life, and beneath Eleanor's weathered exterior, she sensed an untold story waiting to be shared. "Jake, come on!" Clara interjected, stepping closer to Eleanor. "Can't you just give her something? It's cold out there." "Why should I?" Jake snapped. "This isn't a homeless shelter, Clara. We have standards to maintain. If we start serving one, they'll all come begging." Eleanor's heart sank further, but she refused to let the despair show on her face. She had fought for her dignity, fought to remain a person in a world that often stripped her of it. "I'm not here to beg," she said, her voice firmer now. "I'm just asking for a chance." Jake rolled his eyes, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "You're wasting my time. If you don't leave right now, I'll call security." Eleanor felt the room closing in around her, the laughter and whispers morphing into a deafening cacophony. But deep inside, a flicker of defiance ignited. She took a deep breath and glanced around the restaurant, noticing the empty tables scattered throughout, the untouched plates of food left behind by patrons, too engrossed in their own conversations to care about anyone else. "Fine," she said, gripping the edge of the table for support. "I'll go, but I won't disappear quietly. You may not see me, but I am here. I have always been here." With that, she turned on her heel and walked toward an empty table at the far end of the restaurant, her heart pounding with a mix of humiliation and determination. She could feel the eyes of the patrons on her, could almost hear the whispers escalating in intensity, but she refused to let it break her spirit. "Look, everyone," Tom, the man who had first laughed at her, called out to his friends, his voice laced with mockery. "The art lady thinks she can just sit down and claim a table. What's next? A performance? Maybe she'll start sketching us." Eleanor sat down, her hands trembling as she placed her bag on the table. She took a moment to steady herself, drawing in a deep breath. She could feel the heat of their stares, the scorn boiling just beneath the surface. But she also felt something else, a resolve to reclaim her narrative, even if it was just for herself. Clara watched from a distance, her heart aching for the woman who had just been so cruelly dismissed. She had seen people like Eleanor before, individuals who had fallen through the cracks of society, each carrying their own burdens. Clara approached the table slowly, her demeanor softening as she reached Eleanor. "Can I get you something to drink? On the house?" Clara asked, her voice gentle. Eleanor looked up, surprised by the kindness in Clara's eyes. I don't want to be a bother," she stammered. "You're not a bother," Clara reassured her, glancing back at the other patrons who were still whispering and laughing. "You deserve to be treated with respect. I'll bring you some water for now." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She watched as Clara walked away, the waitress's kindness a small light in the darkness that had enveloped her. Tom leaned over to his friends, still unable to contain his amusement. "What's she going to do? Sketch us? Someone should tell her this isn't an art studio." "Shut up, Tom," one of his friends said, though his eyes were still glued to Eleanor, intrigued despite himself. "Maybe she has a story to tell." But Tom was relentless. "A story? Please, what's her story? That she once thought she was an artist? That's pathetic." Eleanor clenched her fists under the table, her nails digging into her palms. The humiliation churned within her, but she could feel the spark of defiance growing stronger. She pulled out her old sketchbook from her bag, the pages worn and frayed, but filled with pieces of her heart. As Clara returned with a glass of water, Eleanor opened the sketchbook, her hands moving instinctively over the pages. She began to draw, capturing the essence of the room around her. The laughter, the disdain, the fleeting glances. Each stroke of her pencil felt like a reclaiming of her identity, a reminder of who she once was and who she still could be. "What are you doing?" Tom called out, unable to hide his derision. "You think you can impress us with your doodles?" Eleanor looked up, her eyes fierce. "This is not for you," she replied, her voice steady. "This is for me, to remind myself of my existence in a world that often forgets those like me." Clara watched in awe, captivated by Eleanor's determination. "You're a real artist, aren't you?" she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "You should show people what you can do." Eleanor smiled faintly, a glimmer of hope igniting within her. "I haven't shared my work in years, but maybe it's time to remind the world." Eleanor sat at the small table, her heart pounding in her chest as laughter echoed around her, cruel and mocking. She could feel the sting of their words like daggers piercing through her fragile spirit. The patrons at the nearby tables were a sea of well-tailored suits and designer dresses, their laughter rising and falling in waves. But to Eleanor, it felt like a storm crashing down on her. She glanced down at her worn-out shoes, the scuffed leather a testament to years spent navigating the unforgiving streets of New York City. With trembling hands, Eleanor reached into her tattered bag and pulled out her sketchbook, the pages yellowed with age but filled with her life's passion. The mocking intensified, a cacophony of jeers and laughter that seemed to drown out the world around her. But in that moment, Eleanor found a flicker of defiance. She set the sketchbook down on the table and opened it to a fresh page, the crisp paper beckoning her. "Look at this," one of the patrons, Tom, sneered, gesturing at her. "She thinks she's an artist. What a joke!" Eleanor ignored him, her pencil poised above the page. She could feel the weight of their ridicule pressing down on her, but she was determined to reclaim a piece of herself. She began to sketch, her hand moving fluidly across the page, capturing the scene around her. The laughter faded into the background as she focused on the details. The way the light bounced off the crystal chandeliers, the elegant curves of the furniture, and the expressions of the people who surrounded her, oblivious to her struggle. "Is she really going to draw us?" Another patron chimed in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What a thrilling spectacle!" Eleanor's heart raced, but she continued to draw. With each stroke of her pencil, she felt a sense of liberation, as if she were reclaiming a part of her identity that had long been buried beneath layers of shame and despair. She could hear the gasps and whispers around her, but they only fueled her resolve. She could feel Clara's gaze on her, a flicker of interest sparking in the waitress's eyes as she caught sight of Eleanor's talent. As she sketched, Clara approached cautiously, her curiosity piqued. "What are you drawing?" she asked, her voice soft yet tinged with genuine interest. Eleanor looked up, momentarily startled by the kindness in Clara's tone. "Just the scene," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Clara leaned in closer, her eyes scanning the page. "It really is. You have an incredible talent," she said, her admiration evident. "I didn't know people like you could create such beauty." Eleanor's heart swelled at Clara's words. "People like me?" she echoed, a slight frown creasing her brow. "What do you mean by that?" Clara hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I just meant, well, you know, the way people look at you. They don't see beyond the surface, but you're more than what they see." Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest, a rare feeling amidst the harsh judgments she faced daily. "Thank you," she managed, her voice breaking slightly. "It's been a long time since anyone saw me for who I am." "Can I see more of your work?" Clara asked, her eyes alight with genuine interest. With a nod, Eleanor flipped through the pages of her sketchbook, revealing scenes from her past. A vibrant landscape filled with colors, portraits of people she had loved, and sketches of her younger self, standing proudly beside her art at various gallery openings. Each image told a story, a fragment of a life that felt like a distant memory. Clara's expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment as she flipped through the pages. "These are remarkable," she breathed, her voice filled with awe. "You were an artist? Like a real artist?" Eleanor nodded, the weight of her past pressing down on her. "Once I was," she said quietly, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper. "Before everything changed." "Changed?" Clara asked gently, sensing the pain behind Eleanor's words. Eleanor paused, her heart aching with the memories she had tried to bury. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I lost everything. My home, my family, my passion. I ended up here, alone on the streets." Clara's expression softened, empathy shining in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "You deserve so much more than this. You have so much talent. It shouldn't go to waste." Eleanor felt a mix of gratitude and sadness at Clara's words. "It's hard to find hope when the world looks down on you," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I keep drawing, hoping to remember who I was, who I can still be." Meanwhile, at the other end of the restaurant, Tom and his friends continued their banter, oblivious to the vulnerable moment unfolding between Clara and Eleanor. "Look at her," Tom laughed, his voice loud and brash. "She thinks she has something to offer. What a joke! Just a washed-up old woman playing pretend." His friends snickered, their laughter ringing in the air like a bitter melody. "Yeah, what's she going to do? Paint the walls with her memories?" One of them chimed in, their words dripping with disdain. Clara felt a surge of anger at Tom's callousness. "You don't know anything about her," she shot back, her voice rising above the laughter. "She's more than what you see. She's an artist and she deserves respect." Tom scoffed, leaning back in his chair with an air of superiority. "Respect? For a homeless woman? Come on, Clara, you can't be serious. She's nothing but a nobody," he replied, his tone condescending. Eleanor felt the tension in the air, the weight of Tom's words pressing down on her chest. She glanced at Clara, whose determination was palpable. The waitress stood her ground, her eyes ablaze with conviction. "Art isn't about status or wealth," Clara insisted, her voice unwavering. "It's about passion and expression. And Eleanor has that in spades. You should be ashamed of yourself for mocking her." Tom rolled his eyes, dismissing Clara's defense with a wave of his hand. "Whatever you say, Clara, but don't let her drag you down to her level," he taunted, his voice dripping with contempt. Eleanor could feel the atmosphere thickening with tension, the laughter around her fading into an uncomfortable silence. She looked down at her sketchbook, the drawings capturing not just her art, but the pain and resilience that defined her life. In that moment, she realized that she had a choice: to let their ridicule continue to define her or to embrace the strength she still held within. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself amidst the chaos. When she opened them again, she felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She was more than the woman they saw, a homeless figure lost in the streets. She was Eleanor, an artist who had once painted the world with her colors, and she would not let their laughter extinguish her flame. With newfound determination, she picked up her pencil and continued to sketch, pouring her heart onto the page. The sound of laughter and ridicule faded into the background, replaced by the rhythm of her own heartbeat and the soft scratch of her pencil against the paper. In that moment, Eleanor chose to rise above, to embrace her identity as an artist, no matter how the world saw her. The battle for respect and recognition was far from over, but she was ready to fight for her place in a world that had forgotten her. As Clara stood beside Eleanor, her heart ached for the woman who had once danced in the limelight of the New York art scene. The restaurant's noise faded into a distant murmur as she focused on Eleanor's words, each sentence drenched in a bittersweet nostalgia. "Art. It's more than just paint on canvas," Eleanor began, her voice trembling slightly, but steady enough to hold Clara's attention. "It was my lifeline. It was how I navigated the world, how I expressed the things words could never capture. I used to create pieces that spoke to people, that made them feel alive. My work was in galleries, sold for thousands of dollars. I was once someone important." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The lines on Eleanor's face told a story of hardship, but her eyes sparkled with the remnants of a vibrant past. The patrons who had previously laughed at Eleanor now found themselves drawn in, their attention shifting from ridicule to intrigue. The air in the restaurant grew thick with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "Then what happened?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper, urging Eleanor to continue. Eleanor hesitated, taking a breath as memories flooded her mind. "Life? It has a way of tearing you down when you least expect it. I lost my husband, the love of my life. He was my greatest supporter, my muse. When he passed, I fell apart. I couldn't paint. Colors turned to gray. I withdrew from the world, from the galleries that once celebrated me. I thought I could find solace in solitude, but it only led me to this." She gestured around her, the luxury restaurant contrasting sharply with her ragged attire. "I lost everything. My home, my family, my art." Tom, seated at a nearby table, scoffed loudly, breaking the spell that had momentarily held the restaurant captive. "Oh, please, save your sob story. Everyone has lost something. It doesn't make you special, lady. Just another nobody trying to pull at heartstrings." His friends chuckled, but the laughter was less enthusiastic now, tinged with uncertainty. Clara felt a surge of anger rise within her. "Tom, just listen to her. This isn't just a story, it's her life. You have no idea what she's been through." Her voice shook with passion, and she took a step closer to Eleanor, as if to shield her from the disdain. Eleanor lowered her gaze, her heart sinking momentarily under the weight of Tom's words. But Clara's fierce defense reignited a flicker of hope within her. "Art has always been my refuge," she continued, her voice gaining strength. Even now, when I draw, I can still feel the brush in my hand, the canvas beneath me. It's the only thing that reminds me of who I was. The restaurant's atmosphere began to shift. Clara could see the patrons, who had initially mocked Eleanor, now leaning in, their expressions softening. Some exchanged glances, their laughter fading as they absorbed the depth of Eleanor's story. Clara felt a swell of pride for Eleanor as she spoke, her spirit rising like a phoenix from the ashes of her past. "And what do you do now?" Clara asked gently, genuinely curious. "I survive," Eleanor responded, a wry smile breaking through her somber expression. "I find places to sleep, places to eat. I sketch in the parks, capturing the beauty around me, even if it feels like I'm invisible. Art is still in me. It never left. It's just buried under layers of sorrow." Tom slammed his hands on the table, visibly irritated. "You're wasting your time, Clara. Why don't you just let her be? She's just a homeless woman with a sad tale. You think a sketchbook can bring back the past? It's pathetic." His voice dripped with condescension, and the laughter from his friends began to die down, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Clara turned to face Tom, her eyes blazing. "Pathetic? You think it's pathetic to find beauty in struggle? To hold on to art when everything else has been stripped away? Look around you. People are listening. They're starting to see her, to understand." At that moment, Eleanor felt a swell of gratitude towards Clara, whose unwavering support was a balm to her wounded spirit. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and prepared to share more of her journey. The words danced on her tongue, eager to be spoken. But just as she opened her mouth to continue, a loud crash shattered the fragile moment. A waiter, carrying a tray overflowing with glasses and plates, lost his grip, sending the entire load crashing to the floor. The sound echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot, drawing everyone's attention. Gasps filled the air as diners turned in shock, some spilling their drinks in the process. Eleanor's heart raced as she looked at the chaos unfolding before her. The waiter crouched, his face flushed with embarrassment, while a few patrons began to laugh nervously, the tension in the room shifting once again. Clara rushed to help the waiter, her kindness an instinctual response to the chaos. Eleanor seized the moment, standing up from her seat, her heart pounding in her chest. The interruption felt like a divine twist of fate, a chance to seize the attention that had just been pulled away. She felt the warmth of Clara's support behind her, urging her on. "Listen," she called out, her voice cutting through the clatter and chatter. "I may be a nobody to some, but I have a story worth telling. My art is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and my life, while filled with hardship, is a tapestry woven with the threads of love, loss, and the pursuit of beauty." The room gradually quieted, the previous laughter fading into an expectant hush. Eyes turned back to her, some filled with curiosity, others with skepticism, but all were listening. "I was once celebrated," Eleanor continued, her voice steady now, gaining momentum. "But the world is a fickle place. One moment you're on top, and the next you're lost in the shadows. I lost my way, but I never lost my love for art. It's what keeps me alive. Every line I draw, every stroke I make, reminds me of who I was and who I can still be." As she spoke, Clara returned to her side, a silent pillar of strength. The atmosphere shifted again, the patrons around them leaning in closer, intrigued by Eleanor's resilience. Eleanor looked around, her heart swelling with emotion. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not just as a homeless woman, but as a person with a past, a story, and a voice. She knew she was on the brink of something profound, but what would happen next was beyond her comprehension. Would they finally understand her? Would she be able to reclaim her identity, even if just for a moment? Before she could delve deeper into her narrative, she caught sight of Tom's disdainful expression, a stark reminder that not everyone was willing to listen. But she was determined. She had come this far. She would not let fear silence her now. With her heart racing and hope ignited within her, Eleanor prepared to continue her story, ready to confront the past and embrace the present, unaware of the unexpected twists that awaited her in the moments to come. The sudden crash of a tray shattering on the floor echoed through the restaurant, momentarily silencing the mockery and laughter that had enveloped Eleanor. She seized the opportunity, rising from her seat with a newfound determination. With her heart pounding, she took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice quivering at first but gaining strength with each word. "I may be a homeless woman now, but once I was known in the art world," she declared, her gaze sweeping across the stunned patrons. "I had my work displayed in galleries, I was celebrated, and my paintings were sought after by collectors. I was Eleanor Hartley, a name that used to mean something." The weight of her words hung in the air, causing a ripple of surprise among the audience. Tom, who had been leaning back in his chair with an amused smirk, suddenly straightened, his expression shifting to one of annoyance. "Anyone can tell a story, old lady," he sneered, crossing his arms defiantly. "That doesn't make you important. Your past is just that, past. You're just a nobody now." Eleanor felt a surge of anger at Tom's dismissive tone, but it was Clara's voice that cut through the tension. "How dare you say that? Her story matters," she interjected fiercely, stepping forward. "Art is not just about fame or fortune. It's about expression, about the heart and soul poured into every piece. Eleanor has lived through things you couldn't even begin to understand, and you have no right to belittle her." The clash of words between Tom and Clara intensified the atmosphere, drawing more patrons' attention. Some began to lean in, intrigued by Clara's impassioned defense and Eleanor's growing confidence. "I lost everything," Eleanor continued, her voice steady now as she recalled the strokes of her past. "In the blink of an eye, I was stripped of my identity. I lost my husband, my home, and my art. I was left with nothing but my memories." As she spoke, her eyes glistened with unshed tears, reflecting the pain of her journey. "I poured my heart into canvases that once brought joy and inspiration to others. I painted the world as I saw it, vibrant, chaotic, and full of life. But as the years went on, tragedy struck. My husband fell ill, and I couldn't afford the medical bills. I had to sell my paintings just to keep a roof over our heads, and when he passed, I lost my reason to create." The patrons' expressions shifted from mockery to curiosity, captivated by Eleanor's raw honesty. "I lived on the streets for years, trying to find scraps of my former self. But every time I picked up a brush, I was reminded of the life I lost. I stopped painting, thinking it was too late for me." She paused, glancing at the sketchbook on the table, her hands trembling slightly. "But then I realized, even here, on these streets, I could still create." Tom's smirk faded as he listened, his bravado crumbling in the face of Eleanor's vulnerability. "That's all well and good," he muttered, trying to regain his composure. "But what does that mean for us? You think your story is going to change anything?" Eleanor locked eyes with him, her voice unwavering. "It means that every person has a story worth telling, a life worth living. You may see me as invisible, but I am not. I am a woman who fought against the odds, who lost everything, yet still holds on to hope. And that's something you'll never understand." Clara nodded, her heart swelling with admiration for Eleanor. "We all have moments in our lives that define us. Just because Eleanor's path has been different doesn't diminish her worth. People have a tendency to judge based on appearances, but it's time we look beyond that." The restaurant had quieted, the laughter replaced by murmurs of agreement. Some patrons exchanged glances, their expressions shifting as they began to see Eleanor not as a homeless woman, but as a person with depth in history, a woman who had once inspired others with her art. Eleanor took a step closer to the table where Tom sat, her voice rising with passion. "You think you know what's important? It's not wealth or status. It's the ability to connect with others, to share our struggles and triumphs. I may not have a gallery anymore, but I still have my voice. I still have my art inside me. And I want to share it, not for fame, but to tell the world that we all matter." The room erupted into a mix of applause and murmurs, the tension thawing into something more supportive. Even Tom, who had been so quick to dismiss her, now looked pensive, perhaps realizing the weight of his words. The laughter that had once reverberated through the walls of the restaurant felt distant, overshadowed by the power of Eleanor's story. "Can you show us?" A voice called from the back of the room, breaking the silence. "Can you show us what you can create?" Eleanor hesitated, her heart racing at the thought of exposing her art to strangers again. But Clara stepped forward, a warm smile on her face. "Yes, show us what you can do. You have nothing to lose, Eleanor, and everything to gain." With trembling hands, Eleanor reached for her sketchbook and a pencil. She could feel the weight of the audience's eyes on her, but this time it felt different. It felt like an opportunity to reclaim her voice, to remind herself of the artist she once was. She flipped to a blank page, the crispness of the paper invigorating her spirit. She began to draw, her pencil gliding across the page with a fluidity she hadn't felt in years. Lines formed shapes, and shapes began to take on life. She sketched the restaurant around her, the elegant chandeliers, the tables adorned with fine china, and the patrons whose expressions had shifted from disdain to intrigue. With each stroke, Eleanor poured her heart into the drawing, allowing her past to mingle with the present. She drew herself into the scene, not as a homeless woman, but as an artist, vibrant and alive. The restaurant transformed into a gallery of her memories, a testament to her resilience. The patrons watched in silence, captivated by her transformation. The laughter that had once echoed off the walls was replaced by the soft sound of pencils scratching against paper, as some even joined in, inspired by Eleanor's courage. As she finished, Eleanor held up the sketch for everyone to see. The room erupted into applause, a chorus of appreciation for her talent and spirit. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she soaked in the moment, feeling the warmth of acceptance wash over her. In that instant, she was not just Eleanor the homeless woman. She was Eleanor the artist, reclaiming her identity in a world that had tried to erase it. Tom, now visibly moved, stood up. "I apologize," he said, his voice softer, more genuine. I didn't see you for who you are. You deserve more than this." His admission hung in the air, a turning point, not just for him, but for many others who had mocked her. Eleanor smiled, a mix of vulnerability and strength. "Thank you. It's never too late to see beyond the surface. We all have stories that deserve to be heard." The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted once again. What had begun as a night filled with laughter at someone else's expense had transformed into a celebration of humanity and resilience. Eleanor had not only shared her past, but had woven a thread of connection through her art, bridging the gap between herself and the patrons who once dismissed her. In that moment, she realized that while the streets had taken so much from her, they could never take away her spirit as an artist. And as long as she had a voice, she would continue to share her story with the world, one drawing at a time. As Eleanor stood in the center of the restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest, the intensity of her story hung in the air like a fragile thread waiting to snap. The tense atmosphere was palpable as she looked around at the patrons, their faces a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Just as she was about to delve deeper into the truth of her life, the door swung open, and in walked a whirlwind of energy. Sophie, her estranged granddaughter. Sophie's eyes darted around the opulent space, searching, desperate. When they finally landed on Eleanor, the world around them faded into a blur. The shock on her face was unmistakable. Her mouth fell slightly open, and her brows knitted together in confusion. Eleanor's heart ached at the sight of her granddaughter, the girl she had lost to time and circumstance. "Sophie?" Eleanor's voice trembled, a mix of hope and fear. Sophie's expression shifted from disbelief to recognition, and she rushed forward, weaving through the tables, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Grandma, is it really you?" Her voice was choked with emotion, echoing in the now silent restaurant. Eleanor took a tentative step toward her, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, my dear girl, I never thought I'd see you again." The distance of years and the weight of their separation melted away in that instant. As the two embraced, the patrons around them watched, their previous laughter stifled by the weight of the moment. Jake, the restaurant owner, stood frozen, his earlier dismissal of Eleanor now feeling painfully misguided. Clara was at the edge of her seat, her heart full as she witnessed the reunion unfold. "Grandma, I've been looking everywhere for you," Sophie said, pulling back to look into Eleanor's eyes. "I didn't know. I had no idea you were here." Her voice was a mixture of anger and sorrow, the reality of her grandmother's situation hitting her with full force. Eleanor wiped her tears, her hands trembling. "It's a long story, love. I never wanted you to know. I thought it was better this way." Sophie shook her head, her expression shifting from confusion to indignation. "Better? You think this is better? You're living on the streets while I've been searching for you, thinking you were gone forever." The patrons, now fully engrossed in the unfolding drama, exchanged glances, their earlier judgments of Eleanor slowly unraveling. Tom, who had been snickering moments before, now looked on with a mixture of regret and realization. "Please, sit down," Clara urged, motioning to an empty seat at the corner table. "You both need to talk." Eleanor nodded, still holding onto Sophie's hands as they settled into the seats. The restaurant, once filled with mockery and disdain, was now a cocoon of empathy, the air thick with unspoken apologies and second chances. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," Sophie said, her voice trembling. "I should have fought harder to find you. I didn't even know where to start." Eleanor's heart swelled with love and regret. "It's not your fault, Sophie. I pushed you away when I should have held you closer. I thought I was protecting you from my failures." "Failures?" Sophie frowned. "You're not a failure. You were an artist, a good one. You had a whole life before." Her voice trailed off, the realization of her grandmother's struggles weighing heavily in the air. "Yes, I did," Eleanor replied softly. "But life doesn't always follow the paths we expect. One moment I was celebrated, and the next, I was lost." She glanced at her sketchbook, still resting on the table, a reminder of the dreams she had once held dear. "I lost everything. My home, my career, and ultimately, you." Sophie's eyes softened as she looked around the restaurant, the patrons now hushed, their eyes filled with a newfound understanding. "But you're still here. You're still my grandmother, and I want to help you." Eleanor shook her head gently, a sad smile gracing her lips. "It's not that simple, dear. There's so much you don't know. It's complicated." "Complicated or not, I want to hear it. I want to understand," Sophie insisted, her determination palpable. "Please, tell me everything." As Eleanor took a deep breath, she glanced at the patrons, their faces now softened with empathy. "Years ago, I was celebrated in galleries across the city. My paintings told stories, evoking emotions that connected people. But then, life took a turn. I lost my husband, and shortly after, my health began to fail. I fell into a spiral of depression that I couldn't escape." Sophie listened intently, her heart aching as she absorbed every word. "And then what?" "I lost my home," Eleanor continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I spent my nights on the streets, and my art, it faded into the background. I thought I could find a way back, that I could reclaim my life, but each attempt felt like a failure." The patrons, once so quick to judge, now shifted in their seats, some with tears in their eyes. Clara stepped forward, her own heart breaking at the raw honesty of Eleanor's words. "You're not alone anymore," she said gently. "We can help you. You don't have to go back to that life." Eleanor looked up, her eyes searching Clara's face for sincerity. "You mean it?" "Of course," Clara replied, her voice firm. "You have a talent that shouldn't be wasted. We can find a way to bring you back into the art world. You just need to take that first step." Sophie squeezed Eleanor's hand tighter, the bond between them rekindling in the warmth of vulnerability and hope. "Together we can do this, Grandma. I won't let you go again." The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted completely. The patrons who had once mocked Eleanor now looked on with admiration, their perceptions transformed. The laughter that had once echoed off the walls was replaced by a profound silence, filled with reflections on their own lives and the choices they had made. Eleanor felt a surge of hope, a flicker of the artist she once was rising within her. "Maybe, just maybe, I could try again," she replied, her voice steadying. As she locked eyes with Sophie, the weight of the world seemed to lift. It was the beginning of a new chapter, not only for Eleanor but for their relationship, filled with the promise of healing and redemption. The restaurant, once a place of ridicule, had transformed into a sanctuary of connection and understanding. The moment hung delicately in the air, a reminder of the power of compassion and the resilience of the human spirit. And as they embraced once more, The past faded into the background, opening the door to a future filled with possibility.